Hello and welcome to the big picture. Ravaged by violence for years, Syria, which has witnessed thousands of deaths in the conflict between government and opposition rebel forces, is attempting to work out peace with the help of United Nations and many other countries. The peace process, which is on in Geneva, called Geneva 2, with the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon presiding over it, has raised hopes of a peaceful solution. However, there are several hitches and roadblocks apparently before the government and the rebel forces can come together and form a transitional government as envisaged by Geneva 1 in 2012. What are these roadblocks and hitches? Will President Bashar al-Assad make concessions, including stepping down as America and some other countries want him to? What role can India play in this peace process? We will discuss all this today with Waiel Awwad, Senior International Correspondent, Pinak Ranjan Chakravarty, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, Prof. A.K. Pasha, Director, Gulf Studies Program, JNU, and John Cherian, Associate Editor of the Frontline magazine. Welcome to all of you. While I'd like to come to you first, you think that the ground situation in Syria is good enough for this kind of a peace process at this point of time?
Well, I think if it is in the spirit of finding a solution, yes. But in the way you look at the composition of forcing the opposition and a coalition or an opposition to go to Syria according to their own choices, denying the true representative of the opposition within Syria and denying key players like Iran to go to it clearly showed that the camp in the Montreux is basically based on an agenda that they wanted to remove this government after they failed for the last 3 years in removing it militarily. But despite the fact that there are more than 140,000 mercenaries from 83 nationalities, as the foreign minister of Syria was saying, it is a fact that they are not going to find a solution. Having said that, I would say always that Switzerland or Geneva or Montreux is just a platform. You know, throughout history, it is a neutral country just to give the platform for the nations, for countries, for the fighting factions to come and decide, and then future talk. So I don't build much hope of this. But I think the Syrian government presented its case strongly at this, that there is a terrorism. Syria is fighting a global war on terrorism. It's not the question of democracy, because if you can see the amount of killing and the spree of destruction in Syria, it doesn't show that these are really after democracy or changing of a government. You cannot, because the alternative to the current government is nobody is interested really to see these kind of heart-eating people killing each other's, you know, the extremists in the true meaning of the word. You can see in 2 weeks they killed more than 2,000 people among themselves.
But while the charges against the government, against the president also is equally as strong, saying that, you know, he's also, the government is also indulging in this similar kind
It's a government.
Yes.
It's a government and then non-state actors. Non-state actor run by those who represent themselves at Geneva. They are the same people with their hands soaked with the Syrian blood. So how can the government has to protect, it's the responsibility of any government to protect its own citizen. And
okay, Mr. Chakravarty, you know, this is the strong argument of the Syrian government, and that, you know, it is protecting its own citizens. But there is also charges that it is actually, you know, involved in a war against its own citizens. In this kind of a atmosphere, what we have seen yesterday and today in Geneva during the talks, very harsh words being exchanged by both sides. Actually, this is the first time they are coming together on a common platform, the opposition and the government forces. So you think in this kind of an atmosphere, what kind of an outcome would you expect in this round of Geneva 2?
Let's be practical. I don't think there will be a breakthrough. My sense is there won't be a breakthrough. The bitterness, the bloodshed, and the fighting that has happened with so much of brutality on either side, I would say.
Right.
But then how did it start? It started in June with a small demonstration. I think the fundamental problem in Syria is that, and has been in many Arab countries, is that there is no democracy in the sense that we understand it. And authoritarian rulers tend to even look at a small demonstration and take very heavy-handed measures.
Right.
So that is one factor. But let's put that aside. But the fact is today, the bitterness and the kind of bloodshed that has happened I think it's unlikely that you will see a major breakthrough at this conference. But let us not be so pessimistic.
Right.
It is the first step, and I hope something will come out of it, because really there's been so much of suffering, 2 million refugees, 130,000 people butchered and killed. But then again, the problem is the Syrian opposition is not just one opposition.
Right.
It is divided.
They're also divided. Professor Pasha, even yesterday when the talks were going on, there were fighting happening in Damascus, suburbs of Damascus, in other places, Homs and all these places. Why do you think that? That this whole process was hasty? They could have waited for some more time, done some more backroom, maneuvering and back channel diplomacy before coming on the table now.
No, this has been in the making for almost 6 months.
Right.
Both the major powers, America and Russia, have been armed to sting parties. Only just 2 days ago, it was uncertain whether the opposition would participate. And even from the Syrian government side, whether there will be active participation, because they were saying that the Geneva 1, which called for transitional arrangements.
The government has not accepted what was decided in Geneva 1.
Because now you have two opposing viewpoints. The opposition and the West wants a transitional arrangement, which is directed at Bashar al-Assad. And the Syrian government wants an end to the terrorism, as they call, practiced by the rebels. So this is one issue. The other issue which gave some hope was the involvement of Iran, because it is a major party involved directly by supporting arms and men, and also through Hezbollah. Ban Ki-moon, wisely I think he invited, but then under Israeli American pressure he had to back down, because I don't think there will be a lasting solution unless major parties are involved. The third issue is this fighting is not going to stop immediately. Although both the major powers are attempting for localized ceasefire, in sectors, and also to allow for humanitarian corridors, so that people who desperately need, food, medicine, and basic blankets, and to withstand the harsh winter, there are talks, and I foresee some arrangement in these three sectors to allow food and medicine and international doctors, WHO, and also to arrange local ceasefire. But an all Syria ceasefire, it is unlikely. It will take much more effort than what has been brought to bear. But it is significant that both the opposition and the government are sitting in the same hall
for the first time.
For the first time. Although under pressure from the major powers.
Right. John, the issue is about, in the talks yesterday and today also, Syrian government officials, Syrian foreign minister, everybody pointing towards how and why Iran has been kept out of it. Why do you think this has happened? Keeping Iran out, what is the whole idea of keeping Iran out of it? And how were these 40 countries which are now, participating in it selected? How much role has UN been able to play? What kind of pressures has it been under?
I think, the Geneva 2 talks, I think it's a non-starter. First thing is they first invited Iran and then disinvited Iran. And then the second conditionality was that anybody who comes for the talks should agree that to a transitional government being formed in Damascus.
Right.
So I believe that the chances for success for the talks were limited from the very outset. Now everybody, that was taken for granted 2 months ago that Iran would be invited.
Right.
And in the preliminary list the UN had released, India as well as Iran were mentioned as among the invitees. At the 11th hour, after the UN Secretary General invites Iran, under pressure, the number one man in the United Nations, the world's top diplomat, is forced to withdraw the invitation to the Iranians under American pressure. And for that matter, I don't think that the Americans were all that opposed to Iran being present. I think it was more Saudi and Israeli pressure. It doesn't make any sense to me, because the Saudis are the main backers of the Islamist fighters in Syria. while Iran is the strongest backer of the Syrian government. If the real peace has to be achieved, Iran should have been there in the meeting.
Right.
So I think the chances for success of Geneva II without Iranian participation are very bleak. And then who are these Syrian rebels representing? Most of the fighting in Syria is being done by the ISIS and the al-Nusra Front, both al-Qaeda affiliates. Now, what the Americans are doing is, they are supporting the Islamic Front, which is backed by the Saudis, which is the so-called good Al-Qaeda, while the bad Al-Qaeda, which is doing the real fighting, is nowhere in the picture, and they are not going to accept any ceasefire.
Okay. While this is the most ironical thing what's happening there, that Americans are having, relying on certain groups which they fight in other places. Here they seem to be having some kind of a partnership here. This strange relationships which are happening there. How is it going to help in the peace process at all? And Syrian government, minimum is there? Do you think that there will be some kind of a minimum understanding to proceed further in this process?
Girish, see, the Syrian government from day one...
Because John Kerry, very, yesterday he was very harsh, and he said that there is no way, if there is in a transitional government, President Assad can be part of it.
I can assure you that John Kerry does not understand the real politics of Syria. There he is speaking only to save his interest with the allies who's paying him the money to pay the arm for the Syrian. The John Kerry and the United States government open a channel with discussion with the Syrian government. There is a secret talk between Russia and the United States for a solution. So small players, they only will keep mum when the big players decide what is the future. So what you saw is just a public consumptions act by all the parties. The real discussion is tomorrow between the faction of Syria, because that is what is most important for us.
No, that is the question. Whether tomorrow's discussion, everybody is keeping their fingers crossed. These two groups from Syria needs to come together, sit together and talk. You think what kind of a role will America or Russia play tomorrow?
See, the amount of pressure they put on this coalition to come, it shows a clear indication that you have to decide on the table now. Either you decide whatever the outcome will be abided by all the parties. Why? Because Syrian government from day one wanted a dialogue, a political solution. The opposition, which is representing supposedly the Syrian people, are the people in there. They have already declared 3 no. No dialogue with the government. Yes to military intervention, Article 7. Yes to humanitarian corridors. These are the 3 agendas. They have not changed for the last 3 years. So
but
now,
the first one, they seem to be changing because they are now sitting, for
yes, because the
dialogue.
Syrian government presented itself like, because they have the support of the people of Syria, it's not easy to topple the government, which is have the support of the people. I mean, 3 years of this much atrocities, even the United States, it has subjected to this 83 nationalities, it have been collapsed by now. If there was no support for a government, why should we listen to what the external forces wanted Syria to do or change the regime? The regime to be decided by the people of Syria.
In fact, Ban Ki-moon in his address yesterday said that this process has to be Syrian-led and things like that. But how far it's possible, Mr. Chakravarty? The role of America, as Waiel feels that it has been America has been the one which has been providing the fuel for the rebel forces there. Would you agree with that? And do you think that John Kerry, by making such a strong statement saying that there can't be a transitional government with Assad being part of it, how is it going to help this peace process at all? And what are Americans trying to do by taking such harsh positions?
Well, I think it's not a good idea to take such harsh positions when you are trying to bring 2 sides to the table. And although you can say that this is a negotiating track and a negotiating position, but remember what happened in Afghanistan years ago, that when the Americans armed the Taliban,
right,
and what happened, that history is well known. I think some of that is being repeated today in Syria. They are backing people. The Islamic National Front, for example, one of the most strongest parties in the, groups in the opposition, are basically Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and these are all these. It's sucking in jihadists from all over the world, including from European countries and other countries. And I think it's become a kind of a global jihad in Syria. And both sides have made mistakes. But the point is, if you are going to back these kind of people who want to convert Syria into an Islamic state with Sharia law, and we all know what Syria has been like politically. The secular nationalist kind of forces, the Ba'ath Party, for example, has had a lot of influence there. So I think this kind of a thing is again going to lead to very, 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 problematic kind of results, which like we live in today in Afghanistan and what's going to happen in this year when the Americans leave. So I think Syria also is heading towards in that direction. I hope they can settle everything and get back to normalcy, but I don't see it happening so soon.
Professor Pasha, role of Russia. Waiel was talking about the back channel diplomacy happening between Russia and the United States. I find it quite interesting what Mr. Chakravarty also is talking. That, on the one hand, Waiel also was talking, on the one hand, Americans playing this kind of a role which they had played in Afghanistan, and they know the lessons which they don't seem to have learned lessons from Afghanistan, from what they've done. And now between US and Russia, what's happening between the two countries?
Between the two, I think there is a broad understanding that this conflict somehow has to be contained. It is getting out of Syria. It is spilling over into Lebanon with daily bombings and killing of people there, and then it is spilling over into Iraq also.
Sorry, but have Americans anywhere admitted that they are that like Waiel says, and many people, even other people also saying, that they have been fueling this rebel activities in Syria? Have they admitted to that at any point of time? Has anybody tried to make them admit that first of all?
No, there is very clear drawing of lines. The Russians have openly told the Americans in the US that for every weapon you give to the rebels, we will give 100. For every tank they get, we will give Assad 100. So there is no question of Russia backing out, including China also is supplying weapons. But what I'm trying to say is the West has developed cold feet as far as this conflict is concerned. They didn't imagine it will spill over into Iraq, into trouble in Turkey, in Lebanon, and now Jordan also is facing a lot of problems. So the Russians and the Americans have now realized that it is better to contain. And just as the Russians delivered the chemical weapons of Syria, which was welcome development for the Americans. So the Americans have now have to deliver that these desperate groups have to be disciplined, and some sort of order or ceasefire, localized ceasefire has to be imposed. The talking and chattering may go on tomorrow and day after, but I suspect that these two major powers have already prepared a draft blueprint of what they will present if these factions don't come together, and because there is no meeting of minds between the opposition and the Syrian government. So there is a sort of an imposed solution in stages, in the making.
Solution in stages. John Cherian, do you think some kind of an imposed solution is possible and it could be imposed successfully? Do you think that is what the Americans and the Russians are trying to do?
Yes, the Americans and the Russians are trying to, find a way out of this tangle, this mess, for which the Americans and their allies in the region are responsible for in the first place. But as the facts of the ground tell another story. It would be very difficult for anybody now to control the jihadist forces that have been let loose in the region. Look at what's happening. It's already spilled over into Iraq. Iraq itself is now facing a civil war.
Right.
And now there's even a talk of forming a new state, with Fallujah as its capital, a jihadi state. I think, as many in Syria have been saying, that finally only a military solution is possible. And the Syrian army is already having the upper hand. The opposition is fighting among themselves. In many places, the Syrian army is just standing aside and watching the militant groups fight each other and kill each other. And so my gut feeling is that a negotiated settlement, that should preferably happen. But what has happened in Iraq. So once the genie is out of the bottle, it's very difficult to put it back in.
Okay. While this, two things which I want you to address. One is what Professor Pasha is talking about, imposed solution. The other is what John is talking about, a military solution to it. Are these two still possible? One, imposed solution. Do you think that the government of Syria is prepared to accept a solution given by these two major world powers?
I think if the priority is changed, like the priority is to fight terrorism in Syria, yes, it is possible. Because the second step will be after 6 months, we are going to have a presidential election in Syria where we can have the changes. Iran has defreezed its own nuclear enrichment for 6 months. So the crucial 6 months is very important for the region. Therefore, I think the Syrian government, yes, having the upper hand militarily to settle the issue. Can be settled in a very simple way. Stop funding the money from Saudi and Qatar. Stop arming them.
Who has to stop it?
Qatar and Saudi Arabia.
No. Who will ensure or who will force these two countries to stop funding?
The Geneva meeting should really come with a resolution abiding all the nations to ceasefire. What does it mean, ceasefire? You need to stop arming. You need to stop funding.
This ceasefire is not something which can be imposed only on what's happening in Syria, but for other countries. That's what you're.
That is with because both the sides agreed if the ceasefire is there. But who have the control in more than 125 group fighting in Syria? Who have the upper hand when the president of Syria said, let us have an Aleppo ceasefire? Nobody came forward because none of the opposition in Geneva are having. It is Saudi, Qatar, Turkey, France and the United States who are the main players in the region. If you stop funding, close the borders, then you will see. Now Turkey closed the border with Syria and they are capturing many of the arms smuggling into Syria. Jordan following suits. Why? Because the pressure from the United States, as the Professor Pasha was saying, and the Russian have realized that now the fire is reaching Europe. What you will do with 10,000 jihadists who are fighting in Syria, going back and blowing themselves up in Europe? That is the danger for them. When UK is denouncing the citizenship of their own people and Australia, excuse me, you take them back. What do you want Syria to do with them? When they are finished, the war is over. We have more than 90,000 people, mercenaries. What you will do with them? Will you give them safety corridor to go back home? Let us face the fact. Let us talk pragmatic on our solution. It's a long haul process. We don't expect an immediate solution.
Professor Pasha, what he's talking about, will there be, in this peace process, will that kind of a resolution or a statement can we expect to come saying, asking Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Turkey and all the nations to withdraw from that and to not support these forces? Do you think such kind of candidness we can expect in these talks?
Last month the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution precisely calling on states to desist from supporting extremist religious groups.
But it has not stopped them supporting.
No.
Since last month, because yesterday we see the last 1 week.
No, neither will the Geneva communique emphasizing the need to desist from financing these jihadis will be listened to by Qatar and Saudi Arabia, because now there is a divergence between what the West wants, led by the United States and Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Because both are not seeing eye to eye as far as Iran is concerned and its role in Syria. But I could not complete my earlier point, that was of the imposed solution, which I suspect is in the making, and many believe, observers also, it is cooking up. And that is linked to the next 6 months, how things will shape up. Because as he said, elections are due for the presidential post, and the transitional arrangements which the West is talking about, ultimately will lead to an election supervised by international community, and the United Nations and Lakhdar Ibrahimi are likely to play a vital role in this coming weeks and months, so that a more broadly acceptable government, because the Syrians also have shown some flexibility. The National Coordination Committee, which consists of 14 domestic parties, including youth groups and left-wing groups, they are also willing to play an important role, which they were not allowed earlier. So there is this willingness on the part of the Assad government, the genuine opposition which is being ignored within Syria, and the fact that these jihadi groups don't represent the Syrian people. Whom are they going to represent? They have gone there as spokesmen, the Syrian National Council. No referendum has been established or plebiscite to say that
who should represent the opposition.
So only a genuinely held election in which the Syrians participate, including the refugees in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Turkey, in Iraq and other places, who will have an opportunity to express their view, whether they would like to have a person acceptable or Assad, whatever it is.
Yes, Mr. Chakravarty. So, the elections, we're talking of elections, but it's 6 months down the line, but there is a serious crisis on hand. How to resolve these problems, find some kind of a common ground, and then going to the elections is a long haul, and a lot of roadblocks before that.
I don't think you can have elections with this kind of situation.
In the next 6 months?
In the next 6 months, I doubt it very, very much.
Yes.
But what I would like to see come out of the Geneva talks is, of course, some kind of an understanding, even if it is a first step, so that some kind of humanitarian and other aid that can reach the people. And if the violence has to stop, you cannot have an election when everybody is fighting everybody in the country. And that is not possible, I think. But what should happen, I think, is that they should prepare the ground for an election. It may happen in 6 months, it may not happen in 6 months. That I can't say at the moment. It will all depend on what concessions, etc. But coming back to the other point is how to do it, how to establish peace. Now, I think the parties that have been supporting these opposition, they need to. Some of it is happening. Some of it is happening.
Very quickly, sir, before we
just one point, Girish.
Yes,
this transition is going to be step by step, localized ceasefire, and also there is talk about international peacekeeping force, which will monitor step by step and then spread to the other areas.
Chakravarty, India, because yesterday the Indian foreign minister was there and he spoke there, and he has offered to play a part in the process.
Yes.
What kind of a part can India play in this process?
I think what India could do is, of course, because India is seen as a benign, neutral kind of a power, and I think if there is an international peacekeeping force, India has played always a role in this kind of things. Way back in the Arab world, in Gaza, even today in Lebanon, we have an Indian contingent in the UN peacekeeping force. So India has the experience of being in the Middle East.
Okay. John, very quick last words to you. Do you see India playing a major role in this, and do you think that India could play some crucial role in the Geneva talks itself?
Well, not as important as Iran could have played, but India has a lot of goodwill in Damascus. The political advisor to the president had come here to talk to Indian leaders, and she has gone back with very positive vibes. The Syrians have been for a long time wanting India to play an important role in solving the crisis, but unfortunately, initially India sided with the other side. But later on, now India is now more neutral and will be more acceptable to both the sides.
Okay, I think on that note we need to end. It's a tough situation out there, as all my panelists have pointed out. We can only hope that there will be some solution, or at least a temporary solution found, so that it can lead to a permanent solution at some point of time. We need to keep a close watch on what's happening out there. Thanks to all my guests, Waiel, Awwad, Professor A.K. Pasha, Pinak, Ranjan, Chakravarty and John Cherian. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on the big picture same time tomorrow.